Welcome to another Witchdoctors how-to video. Today we're going to do something that's a little bit more difficult. We're going to replace the lowering link in a Victory, Cross Country, or Crossroads. What this will do, it'll allow you to lower the bike down. The Witchdoctors kit offer 3 different part numbers: a 1-inch lower, a 1.5-inch lower, and a 2-inch lower. So the first thing you're going to want to do, and I've already done it, is I've taken off the saddlebags. Take both side saddlebags off and both side covers, the plastic side covers, they just pop out. So I've already done that. So the first thing we're going to do is remove the seat. Takes a 6mm Allen bolt, Allen socket. There's a bolt on each side. Just loosen those bolts, take both bolts out. And one thing I know from doing this forever is you might want to get like a little cup or a little tray or something to put your bolts in so you don't lose them, so you remember where everything goes. You do the same thing on the other side. Once you get those bolts out, the seat should just lift off. You have to kind of pull it forward a little bit and just lift it off. It's real easy to do. Once you do that, you don't have to disconnect any of this wiring. We're just going to take this whole panel and set it to the side. Again, that takes a 10mm socket. And sometimes the wiring covers up these bolts. They're a little bit hard to see, but they come out real easy. There's one kind of tucked down in here. And one more back in here. And for those of you that don't know, this valve right here, this is what puts your air in the shock, and that's what raises your suspension up or down. Gives you a softer or more firm ride. Doesn't require a lot of pressure, so don't overdo it. Okay, you get those bolts out. Now this, just kind of move it a little bit, but you can kind of tuck it up out of the way. If you maybe need a bungee cord or something, you can hook it here and kind of hold it out of the way. But what we want to do is we want to get in. The lowering link is right here. This is it in there. So that's kind of the first steps to getting in there and doing it. Okay, the next thing you want to do is just get the back wheel off the ground about 4 or 6 inches, just enough so it can move. The way we do that is just a regular jack, motorcycle jack. I don't know, I think I got this one at Harbor Freight. Nothing special. Like all my videos, I try to show you how to do stuff with normal tools, nothing fancy. I don't have a big bike lift. This is just a regular floor jack motorcycle lift to raise the back wheel off the ground. You can see back wheel's off the ground about 4 or 5 inches. What we're trying to do, we're trying to get to the shock bolts underneath here. You can see right here is the shock absorber bolt, and right here is the lowering link bolt. Those are the 2 bolts we need to take out. So what we need to do is we need to loosen those up, and then the wheel will drop down a little bit and we can get the bolts out. So let me show you. It's real easy. It's a 15mm wrench, so you need a wrench, and you also need a 15mm socket. What you want to do first is you want to break those nuts loose. Don't worry about the socket part. Those nuts are really tight. So you want to get on there. You want to break that nut loose and just get it loose. Now the bolt will start to spin, but that's okay. Just get it loose. Do the same thing on the lowering link. Once you get those nuts broke loose, take your socket, and all we're trying to do at this point is get the nuts off. You want to still leave the bolt in there. And they go hard the whole way. They're the lock nut on there. So you really can't do them with your fingers. And again, I just got a cheap floor jack, and as long as you're careful, you're fine. It's a little harder than doing it on a lift table, but it works. Get a better grip on this. Okay, so there's the nut for the lowering link. And we're going to go around to the other side and do the same thing on the shock. And I'm using about a 10-inch extension or so on my ratchet. Helps reach in there a little bit better. If you don't break that nut loose first, this is really hard to do. Okay, there's the nut for the shock. So now what I do is I let a little bit of air out of the air shock. And the way you do that is right here on your valve. You can just take a little screwdriver and push that center in. It's not going to come out like a car tire. There's not that much pressure. So just push that in, and you'll release the pressure on the air shock. What that's going to allow you to do is move the suspension up and down a little bit easier to get those bolts out. So now that we've done that, you want to just reach underneath there and sometimes you can push the bolt out and sometimes you can't. So what I like to do is I do what they call the sweet spot. You want to find the spot where that bolt will just push right out. Now, the way you do that is you lower down the jack. You put just a little bit of pressure on the rear tire so that you find that spot where those bolts will come right out. Okay, so I lowered the bike down, and you can see the back wheel's on the ground. So what we want to do is, like I said, just try to find that sweet spot. So you may have to jack the bike up just a little bit. This is where somebody to give you a hand helps, because it's just a real small little, it's like 1 or 2 pumps of the jack where that bolt will come out. And right there it is. See that? Bolt came right out, no problem. Do the same thing on the lowering link bolt. They come right out once you get that sweet spot. Now, the suspension is, the shock suspension is separated from the swing arm right now. So you can jack up the suspension, you can jack up the bike, and the back tire will still stay on the ground. And that's normal. So what that's doing is that's giving us some room in there so we can work. So as you can see, the bolts out of both the shock is loose from the swing arm, and also the lowering link is loose. Now you can see in there much better what we're trying to do. Get this piece to stay up out of the way that I should have put a bungee cord on earlier. But this is your lowering link right here. This is the piece we're going to change to lower the bike down. This is your shock over here. This is your air bladder section of your shock. Okay, so the next thing we're going to want to do is up in the top here under your seat. There's an Allen head bolt in there. You have to take that Allen head bolt out. What that bolt does is it holds, it's the stop for the pin. There's a pin in the suspension underneath that we have to pull out. If you don't take that bolt out, you can't pull that pin out. So it's a 6mm Allen, and it's real easy to do. Nothing falls out, just take that bolt out. Pretty long bolt, so okay, and that's it. There's nothing down in there, just a bolt hole. Take my panel here and bungee cord it up out of the way. Now, something that's a little bit more difficult, not hard, just more of a pain in the butt, is your splash shield here. This is your inner fender splash shield. We want to get that out of the way. It just makes it easier to get in there and work. You just got to kind of pry it out of there and pull it out of there. Again, not difficult, but just a little bit of a pain. If you look up on here, up under your fender, this little flap right here is what holds it in. If you kind of just shove that down through, if you do that, that'll make it so it's a little bit easier to get out. And it is kind of wedged in there, so you just got to kind of twist it. There's no bolts or anything that holds it in. It's just wedged in there, and I disconnect that hose. Take these hoses, they're just looped through there. Just take that out and take the shield completely out. Now what that does, that gives you a whole good working area in there. This pin right here is the pin that has to come out. That's where that bolt came down. That bolt came right down through here, and it blocks this pin from coming out this way. It's like a stop. So that's why we have to take that bolt out. We have to get that pin out. Okay, I'm going to try to show you a couple of tricks here. Might be a little bit hard to see with the camera, so I'll do my best here. But a couple tricks. If you do it this way, life will be so much easier. What you want to do is the shock, you can see the shock is still on the lower swing arm. It's still strapped over it, okay? What you want to do is you want to grab the shock underneath here and raise it up. It's real easy, it'll pull right off. And what it is up in the top, and it's hard to see, but it's on a seesaw. One side tips down. You can see the bolt coming down. It's like a teeter-totter. And that's where that big bolt is up here. This bolt right here. Try to get you to see this bolt. That's that pin I talked about earlier. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that's loose. Once you get that loose, just pull this pin out. Comes out real easy. Just pull that out. Everything will kind of drop down, but it won't fall out. You don't have to worry about it. Because what we have to do, we have to get to this bolt right here. This is the top of your lowering link. If you don't pull that pin out and you try to do it the way everybody else tells you, you will be there forever trying to get this out. So all you got to do is pull that pin out. Like I say, lift up on the shock a little bit, get everything freed up so everything's nice and loose. Pull that pin out, and now your bolts are right here so you can get to them. It's real easy that way. Okay, so these two bolts, nut, bolt, 17 millimeter. So the same thing, you just want to break it loose. You can twist it a little bit, break it loose, and take that nut off. Now everything's loose, so nothing's going to fall, you're not going to lose anything. If you notice, the belt's real loose here. I didn't loosen that up. It's just because the tire's down so far. A lot of people tell you you have to take the back tire off. You have to take the belt off. No, you don't. Not at all. Obviously, you're seeing me do it and the tire's on. So take that nut off. The bolt will push right out. Now there's a couple spacers in here. Watch you don't drop those. Take that bolt out and the link will come right out. Simple as that. Here's your spacers. They're just on there. So you're going to reuse the spacers, you're going to reuse the bolt, and you're going to reuse the nut. The stock link you're not going to use anymore. Okay, so here's the Witchdoctors link. This is a 1.5 inch lowered link. Like I said before, we offer a 1 inch, a 1.5, and a 2 inch. Now you might wonder, why in the world do you need all those? Well, the big reason is what it does, it lowers the back of the motorcycle down and it puts people's feet flatter on the ground. It gives you a more secure feeling when you stop. You're more in control of the bike when your feet are flat on the ground. That's one reason. The other reason is basically because people think it's cool. They lower the bike down. They just want that lowered look. And the third thing is it does change the angle of how you sit on the seat. Your back is a little bit different, which then puts your arms in a little bit different spot for the handlebars. So you do get a little bit more comfortable of a ride. Okay, so we're just going to do all this in the reverse order. What I'm going to try to show you here is what this looks like inside here. This big hole here is where that pin goes through in the frame right here. So it's dropped down now, but that's what we need to do. We need to, when we put everything back together, we need to slide this back up in here and put that big pin through. So that's kind of what's hard to show you, but when my hands are in there, so I show it to you now. So we're going to take the spacers, put them back in the Witchdoctor link, go right in there, take the link, and if the spacers aren't in all the way, they won't fit in here. So you might have to jiggle those spacers around. Same thing like if you saw our bushing kit for the changing the front pegs. You might have to tap them in a little bit. Okay, put your bolt through, and again the bolt went from the back side through, nut in the front. And you want to tighten this all the way back up, because once it's up in there, like I said before, it's you can do it, but it's so time consuming. It's such a tight fit. You really have to get your hands up in there. And again, you don't have to break the bolt when you tighten it. Every time I see stuff, people over tighten stuff so bad. Just get it snug. Now we're just going to do the same thing. We're going to take this pin, and you might check the pin. If it's dirty, rusty, anything like that, you want to clean it off first. You want this to slide in real nice and smooth. You might even take a little grease, not a lot, just a real thin coat, maybe a little Vaseline, put it on there. Make sure you just put it on this end. If you put it on the end here where you're trying to hold, you'll never grab it. So just make sure you put the grease out on that end. This one's pretty clean, so we're good. So what we're going to do is just kind of lift this back up in there. Now it's kind of heavy to do with one hand, so I lift it up in there and I look through the back to make sure where my pin's going to go. Just do it, and bam, there it goes. Everything's back together now. Your shock is down on your lower swing arm because you didn't take it off. Everything's in the same place. Your link's hanging in there ready to go. Everything's nice and tight. So what we're going to do We're going to take this bolt, we're going to put it back in the top. Just going to get it in there finger tight for right now. But we put it back in the top so that we don't forget, because you don't want that pin coming out of there, that's for sure. Next thing we're going to do, just everything in the reverse order. We're going to take our splash shield. We're going to put it in there. Remember to kind of put the hoses back where they went. Sometimes I tell people, if you're not sure how to do something, take a picture of it first. Just take a quick picture with your phone or a camera. And again, this is just going to snap in. You can actually see little slots in the frame where that snaps in. Simple as that. You go back up on the top. Make sure your hoses are routed. You don't want to have anything pinched. Just make sure they tuck back in like they were. Now the hard part's done. It's basically no harder than that. So what we're going to do next, we're going to lower the bike down. We're going to find that sweet spot again, and we're going to put the bolts in. Okay, we lowered the bike down. Now here's another trick. When you lower the bike down to find the sweet spot, make sure you lower it maybe a little bit too far. It's much easier to put the jack up, going up very slowly to find that sweet spot. If you're trying to drop the jack, the weight of the bike and everything drops the jack really quick, so it makes it much more difficult to do that. The other thing is, since there's no air in the shock, you can pivot this a little bit. So I don't know if you can see there, if you can see that, but we're really close. So all we got to do is just pull this down just a hair, and then the bolt will go right in. So let me do that. Now one hard thing here is your belt is going to be right just about in the way. I find it's easier to go on top of the belt than it is to try to go underneath it, go above it when you're putting this bolt in. And there you go. Simple as that. I'm going to do the same thing on the shock side. Now, the shock side is going to be a little bit harder because this link is connected now. The swing arm is connected. So that's where we have to find that sweet spot. And if you just watch it, try to get the camera here so you can see. It isn't quite lined up. So what we're doing is we're looking right here. We're trying to get that lined up. And sometimes this is hard. Especially when you're by yourself. You see how hard that is trying to lower the bike? Now, a better quality jack would definitely do that. much better than what that just did. But this is kind of a hard part to do because it gets so close, but yet it's a hair off. This is definitely probably the most tricky part of this whole deal. Sorry about that. Took a little longer than I thought, but I did get the bolt in. I just love those shows you watch on TV where they're doing a whole car, doing a whole motorcycle in the end of a half hour. Everything's perfect and it went smooth. Well, it doesn't always work like that. But anyhow, all we got to do is tighten those back up. And we're almost done. So you're going to just tighten your link back up and also your shock. And you can put them all the way tight. It's definitely easier to do those bolts if you have a second person to help you run the jack, because you have to run the jack when you're by yourself. You run the jack, go down, look, jack it some more, go down, look. Make sure the bolt's going through. Okay, so once those are tight, you're pretty much in the home stretch. So now we're back up on top. The bolt, the locking bolt, the pin locking bolt that we put in there earlier, finger tight. Make sure you tighten it up now. Again, nothing crazy, just snug it up. Now here's a question for you. We're going to put this panel back on. We took out 3 bolts. Do you remember which 3 it was? We got 2 short and 1 long. Remember where the long one went? If you would have taken your pictures with your camera, you would know, or else lay the parts out. But luckily, we're going to show you. You got a short one back here. Another short one down in this corner. And the long one goes up under this wire up here. Now, when you put this back together, you want to just make sure you don't have any wires tucked anywhere. This kind of loop hooks in right there. So you just want to make sure you're not pinching any wires off or anything. Again, 10mm socket. I have kind of a fancy ratchet here that lets me spin stuff a little quicker, but any ratchet works. Snug the bolts back up, and again, I just go till they stop and then just a little bit. Most things tell you to torque it, but I don't think anybody does. Okay, so that's basically all you're doing. Now what you want to do, get your air, and I believe that you can use a football pump, you know, and do it. This is kind of fancy, but just put a little air in there so that your shock's solid. Put your cap back on. The only thing left to do now is put on the seat. So you're going to simply take the seat, kind of slide it forward. Make sure it hooks in the back. There's a clip back there. Set it on. Put your bolts back in. Just put them in finger tight. You want to get them both started first. You never want to tighten all the bolts up until you get them all in. Then tighten the bolts up. So once you get them in, your socket. Tighten them up. You're going to put your side panel, your saddlebags back on, and you'll be all set. Once again, thanks for watching Witchdoctors How To.